Hello there, Star Wars fans. Today we're going to start part 1 of this fan fiction with part 2 releasing tomorrow. What if Mace Windu survived and went after Anakin Skywalker, now Darth Vader? I had a lot of fun writing this and part 2. I think it's just fun. So yeah, sit back, enjoy. Please consider subscribing so you can see part 2 as soon as it's released, and leave a like to spread this to other Star Wars fans. It'd be great if you would subscribe and join this daily Star Wars community. I enjoyed this one. Sit back, let's get into it. The Jedi legend Mace Windu was falling through the skies of Coruscant, falling half a kilometer from the Chancellor's office to the ground, while his entire world had been turned upside down in just one fatal moment. He fell, barely fighting off death, fighting off unconsciousness, focusing on the here and the now, focusing on survival. Halfway to the ground, he called upon the Force to bring a speeder underneath him to a halt, so he could try to land in it, but still in a daze, he just hit the side and continued to fall. He couldn't die. Not like this, he thought. As he continued to fall, there was one more layer of speeders. He had one more chance to do this. He fell, and finally found another speeder under him. Mace pushed the speeder towards the ground at a lesser rate than he was falling, lining himself up perfectly. Eventually, with a screaming Rodian flying the speeder, Mace made a rough landing in the passenger seat. With some of his last bits of strength, he grabbed the wheel from the terrified Rodian and took the speeder to the ground. After landing, Mace flopped to the ground, crawled in between two buildings to hide. His whole world was crumbling. He was bruised on every part of his body, burned from the lightning of the Sith, and he was missing a hand. And thrown out of a window like an insect. Because of Skywalker. Mace couldn't help but just chuckle a little, which caused immense pain to his broken ribs and his charred body. He was right about the boy from the very start. And then, Mace fainted from the injuries to both his mind and his body. 3 years later, the fifth brother and the seventh sister were dispatched to the planet Ryloth, where there had been scattered reports of Jedi activity. The Empire was in their beginning stages of occupying Ryloth, and the Inquisitors were here to snuff out any possible Jedi threat. They made their way through the main city, seeing nothing suspicious, but their intel had said the Jedi was likely on the outskirts of town, and the Inquisitors found themselves approaching that area. They would get the Jedi to show themselves eventually, they thought. Once outside of town, the Inquisitors approached a mountain settlement, where fewer Twi'leks lived, but where they lived in a more traditional sense. If there is a Jedi here, it seems like this would be the settlement to hide in, the fifth brother said as they made their way through the settlement with hateful stares from the citizens. Agreed, I'll draw them out, said the seventh sister as she pulled a nearby citizen into the air. It was a boy no older than 18. She yelled, "Citizens of Ryloth, the Empire will be merciful and even resourceful to you if you tell us where this rumored Jedi is hiding. If not, well then you will all suffer the consequences, one by one." And she began slowly choking the boy. As the boy struggled in the air, feet kicking, clawing at his neck, she looked for an emerging Jedi, but saw nothing. "Fine, then he will die," she exclaimed, and as she went to close her hand, crushing the boy's trachea, a flying lightsaber blade swiftly cut through her shoulder, dropping her arm to the ground as the boy fell to his knees. The fifth brother looked up in shock, but was immediately shoved about 40 yards away with an extreme force push. The seventh sister looked into the air in fear as a man pulled back the saber into his hands, and in one swoop, he cut off her head as he landed on the ground. The fifth brother got back up, igniting both ends of his lightsaber, and he looked around in horror. The Jedi was no longer standing there, but his partner lay dead, and dismembered in front of him. Surrounded by rocks and tall grass, the fifth brother prepared to retreat, but as he turned around, he saw him. Jedi Master Mace Windu, the Jedi Council legend, thought to be one of the first killed in the Purge, was now standing in front of him. Mace stood in front of the Inquisitor. He was disfigured, burned, one robotic arm, but more intimidating than any Jedi the fifth brother had seen to this point. Mace then lifted his hands, raising 20 or so small boulders with the Force, and threw them at the fifth brother, knocking him down and burying him, leaving just enough of an opening for Mace to walk up to the Inquisitor, struggling to breathe, and stabbing him through the heart. The last thing the Inquisitor ever heard Mace say was, "At last I will reveal myself to the Sith and kill Anakin Skywalker." Mace then walked back to the Twi'lek camp that he'd been hiding in since the Purge. It was time for him to leave, as to not endanger the people that had taken him in. Mace remembered it all much more clearly now than he did when everything had happened. 3 years ago, he'd woken up on the Coruscant streets, sounds of screaming and confusion filling his ears. As he'd woken up, pain shot through every part of his body, especially his right hand. When he fainted, it was nighttime. Now it was clearly day, and Mace looked down to his right hand. Well, what used to be his right hand. Slowly, Mace got up and limped to the top of a nearby tall building to see where the smoke in the air was coming from. And at the top, his worst nightmare hit him. The entire Jedi Temple, burning and crumbling to the ground. Mace fell to his knees, and an image of Anakin Skywalker standing by his side as he was about to destroy the Sith was burning in Windu's mind. The image of Anakin screaming and slicing his hand off as Mace stood there, getting electrocuted and being thrown to the ground, was all Mace could picture. It burned inside of him. It burned. And despite his rage, Mace knew he was nowhere close to being able to fight Anakin and Palpatine right now. He was using all of his strength just to stay alive as he made his way to a screen down below to see the HoloNet breaking news that read, "Breaking. Jedi attempt to execute the Chancellor and take over the Republic. The Chancellor is safe, and the clone troopers have been instructed to eliminate all Jedi." Mace didn't have time for anything except escape right now. He grabbed a speeder bike helmet from a nearby shop, put it on, before pulling a robe over his head. He felt out for his lightsaber and was able to go and grab it. He now, with his saber, was wearing a disguise amidst the Republic he'd spent the entire war protecting. This was not something he ever anticipated. He found his way to a local hangar where he found a smuggler preparing to take off. He approached the man and used a Jedi mind trick to get him to take Mace off-world. As they took off, Mace asked the man where he was going, and he replied, Ryloth, which was the first win Mace had in what felt like forever. He had friends on Ryloth, for in the Clone Wars, he had helped to liberate the planet, perhaps the most pointless war in the history of the galaxy, thought Mace. Once on Ryloth, Mace snuck around until he found Cham Syndulla, the man he'd formed a nice bond with while freeing the planet. From there, Mace had lived rather peacefully and quietly, though tormented, among the Twi'lek people. Few knew who he truly was, as he kept his face covered and his training completely separate, but those who knew him and remembered him welcomed him. Now Mace prepared to leave, in order to draw whoever came for him next away from Ryloth. He embraced Cham Syndulla and the others, thanking them for their hospitality. He said goodbye to the daughter Hera before leaving, as the two had formed a nice bond. And Mace left the planet, traveling to an outer world he was familiar with and a planet he knew the Empire was beginning to inhabit. It was a snowy planet that all Jedi visited, and the Empire did not deserve to have. Mace traveled to Ilum. As he entered the atmosphere, he landed away from anyone else on the planet with all of his gear and a bag containing the head of the seventh sister. Mace would draw the Empire here rather than Ryloth, and after settling down in a hidden cave, Mace went to find an Imperial settlement. And eventually, he found a group of about 15 stormtroopers just sitting around, eating food as if they owned the planet. Again, there were about 15, Mace noticed, and without much hesitation, Mace grabbed 2 at the same time, breaking their necks and throwing them at 2 others, knocking them all down the cliff they were seated by. The remaining 11 scrambled to get their blasters, and with a shaky voice, the leader yelled, "Freeze, Jedi, or die!" And Mace ignited his saber, as if to taunt them, as if to show his purple saber, to give a hint as to who they were all dealing with. "Fire!" the trooper yelled, and Mace deflected every single blast, killing 7 of the troopers and leaving 3 injured as the leader stood unharmed. Mace grabbed the bag of the Inquisitor head and threw it to the leader. When they looked back up to the Jedi, he was gone, and the squad was left in fear to report back to the highest level of the Empire on what had just happened. Darth Vader strode into the main room of his castle, where a bounty hunter waited for him. Vader had recently been informed of 2 Inquisitor deaths that had their bodies found on Ilum, along with a squad of stormtroopers wiped out. The report also included a detail that shocked Vader like a blast of lightning to his core. The reported enemy was wielding a purple lightsaber. Before Vader set out himself to kill a Jedi, he wanted confirmation on who this truly was. He didn't want to admit it to himself, but Vader feared Windu more than any other Jedi. But he couldn't be alive. It couldn't be Windu. Vader watched him fly out of a window, burning, scarred. He spoke to the bounty hunter. "I have a high-paying mission for you. I need you to kill a Jedi that has killed 2 of my Inquisitors. You will be heavily rewarded if you bring me his lightsaber as proof of his death." "It will be done. What details do you have on the Jedi?" the bounty hunter replied, the voice of Boba Fett speaking back to Vader. Vader had to fight back memories of this same clone voice. Rex, Cody, memories of the Clone Wars. Vader pushed them away. He didn't like Boba's voice as it reminded him of those times. "Only a location," Vader replied. "Ilum. And one more thing. He wields a purple lightsaber." "Windu," Boba said with more emotion Vader had ever heard from him. "No, that's impossible. I saw him die," Vader insisted. But Boba could hear the doubt in Vader's voice, though he didn't question it any longer. He agreed to the mission and got in his ship with a course set for Ilum. His reputation to this point was unquestioned. He was the man for this job, and he took off. Boba landed near the coordinates of the stormtrooper camp that was ambushed by the Jedi, and as he got out of the ship and approached, a chill ran down his back from the cold, and from the sight of 10 bloodied stormtrooper helmets on stakes in the camp. Boba worked alone, but getting any details at all from the troopers would have been nice. Instead, he shot upwards with his jetpack and set the thermal vision onto his helmet. He looked around for a moment before he saw him, a man in the distance, staring at Boba Fett with a lightsaber ignited. Boba flew back down and began slowly going to the location of the Jedi. He couldn't be seen too quickly, as he had to counter the Force with the element of surprise. And finally, Boba reached a cave with supplies, and a man in the shadows was waiting. A purple hue lit up the cave, and then the Jedi brought it to his face, lighting it for Boba to see for the first time in years. It was him. It was the man that had cut down his father in cold blood on Geonosis, all those years ago. So, it is you. I will avenge my father, you murderer, Boba told him. Mace replied, If you try, I'll cut you down the same way I did to your father. Don't try it, Boba. And with that, the two combatants charged at each other. Windu swung his lightsaber in a powerful arc, but Fett was too quick. He dodged the attack, firing a barrage of blaster bolts at the Jedi, but Windu was able to deflect these bolts with rather ease, his lightsaber moving faster than Boba could even see. The two continued to dance around the room, trading shots at each other. You're not as tough as I remember, Fett spat at him. You underestimate me, bounty hunter, Windu replied, his eyes blazing with the Force. Fett fired a rocket from his backpack, but Windu deflected it back at him with a flick of his wrist. Boba should have seen this coming, but the explosion sent him flying through the air as he quickly tried to regain his footing. The battle would continue, each combatant evenly matched in skill at this point. Windu knew they had to end the fight rather quickly before Fett had a chance to regroup. So he summoned the power of the Force and hurled a crystal at the bounty hunter. Fett dodged the crystal from the ceiling, but Windu was ready now. He charged at Fett, lightsaber blazing, and landed a powerful blow to the hunter's helmet as Fett tried to get away. He stumbled backwards, dazed, and said, You'll pay for that, Jedi. He used his jetpack to fly backwards and pulled a thermal detonator from his belt. The last explosion hadn't gone well, but he'd learned from it, so as Boba threw the detonator and he saw Windu go to use the Force, he threw out his wrist cable, tying up Windu's hands. And now this explosion sent Windu flying back and disconnected the cable. He was still on his feet, though, to the surprise of Fett. The determination, the anger in Mace Windu was different than ever before, and after regaining his balance, Windu began to charge, and as he did, he dislodged a crystal and stabbed it through Boba's jetpack. Here they were, the same situation Jango was in on Geonosis. Windu charged. Boba aimed with precision, but it didn't matter. Windu cut down the gun of Boba and stopped his lightsaber an inch from Boba's head. It's over, Mace said. Tell me where to find Skywalker. Back in Vader's castle, he talked with the Emperor. Vader protested as it was the Emperor's decision to send a bounty hunter rather than to send Vader. Vader couldn't understand why at this point, as yes, he feared Windu, but he was ready to kill him. He was ready to take him out. But the Emperor insisted. You will see soon why I chose to send the bounty hunter instead of you, Lord Vader. You will have your chance for revenge. Trust me. Vader was conflicted. He wanted to go after Windu, but he had to listen to his master. Boba too had been confused on why he was the one going, rather than Vader. But yet Vader replied, Yes, my master. And that's where we're ending part 1 today. Boba and Windu. Windu capturing Boba. Vader angry that he didn't get to go. Emperor Palpatine telling him that it was his decision, saying, Hey, Vader, it's my choice that you don't get to go after Windu right now. So, part 2 will pick up tomorrow. It's gonna be a good one. I'm excited for it. Hope you're excited for it. Stay tuned. Yeah, subscribe so you can get part 2. And I'll see you in the next video.